And welcome back. Today we're diving into Chapter 6, which focuses on one of the most significant forces shaping our modern world, globalization. This is a topic that affects virtually every aspect of our lives, from the clothes we wear to the jobs we pursue to the food we eat. You probably have heard the term globalization countless times. But today we're going to really unpack what this means, how it works, and what its consequences are for workers and economies around the world. This is a complex topic with passionate supporters and fierce critics. So let's explore the evidence and see what we can learn. Let's start with a clear definition of globalism. Globalism is a large and expanding process of economic, political, and cultural interaction among the nations of the world and the people who inhabit them. Now, this might sound like a very modern phenomenon, but the chapter points out that globalization has actually been around for a long time. In fact, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were describing what we now call globalization way back in the middle of the 19th century. They wrote about capitalism's relentless efforts to bring all parts of the world into its economic orbit, saying that, quote, the need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. What is particularly interesting is that if we look at trends in world trade as indicators of globalization, it was actually more evident in some ways before World War I than it is today. Back then, capital flowed freely between nations, travelers could journey to foreign countries without a passport, and immigration was virtually unchecked. However, today's globalization is much more extensive in terms of international trade. U.S. exports went from about 5% of GDP in 1890 to 12.7% in 2008. So, who is driving globalization? There are several key agents working to expand these global connections. First, we have national governments that are deeply involved in global issues as they seek to protect their interests and extend their influence. They've created trade agreements, eliminated barriers, and promoted economic integration. Second, multinational corporations like Microsoft, Hyundai, Royal Dutch Shell, and Toshiba are heavily involved in enlarging and interconnecting the international economy. But it's not just the big names. Many smaller, little known firms that supply these giants are also important players. Third, we have non governmental organizations like Planned Parenthood, Doctors Without Borders, and the World Wildlife Fund that are heavily involved in global issues, spreading ideas, values, and practices across borders. And finally, advanced transportation and communication technologies have made globalization possible by eliminating or greatly diminishing geographic barriers. As Thomas Friedman put it in his best selling book, The World is Flat, meaning that 21st century technologies have tied many disparate parts of the world into a single interconnected system. But here's a crucial point. These technologies have made globalization possible, but they haven't done so in a deterministic way. People and organizations decide how to use these technologies, which means globalization is a human creation with a potential to be shaped according to human needs. Let's look at a specific example, the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. This was enacted in 1994. NAFTA eliminated or phased out most tariffs and trade barriers between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. This threw a spotlight on factories called maquiladoras located on the U.S.-Mexican border, about 3,000 enterprises that produce manufactured goods for multinational companies using low-cost labor. NAFTA has been widely blamed for job losses in the U.S., and that is a valid concern that needs to be put in perspective. Yes, NAFTA has resulted in the loss of some jobs in the U.S. when firms moved operations to Mexico. But other forces have also been involved, particularly technological changes that we discussed in earlier chapters. The chapter notes that in 2007, total trade between the three NAFTA countries was 903 billion, a very large sum, but less than 6% of the aggregate gross national product. Much of that trade centered on oil, minerals, and services rather than manufactured items. It's also important to note that NAFTA covers only a small part of the U.S. economy. While it eliminated some jobs, it created new jobs based on exports to Canada and Mexico. This illustrates how globalization's effects are more complex than simple job loss narratives might suggest. This brings us to one of globalization's most visible agents, multinational corporations, or MNCs. These are firms that wholly or partially own and operate enterprises in more than one country. Today's MNCs are involved in resource extraction, manufacturing, and services, and they're responsible for much of the cultural homogenization we see around the world. Some of the earliest MNCs were involved in mining or plantations and earned horrible reputations for their treatment of workers and interference in local politics. Think of the United Fruit Company in Central America or Belgian mining interests in the Congo. Today's MNCs are more commonly involved in manufacturing, retailing, and services, and while their presence isn't always benign, they rarely approach the abuses of the predecessors. Much of the apparent homogeneity of today's world, comes from consumer-oriented MNCs like Walmart, McDonald's, and Hard Rock Cafe. These companies have used systemization, advanced technologies, and sheer size to lower costs and reach global markets. But they've also driven small retailers out of business and have been criticized for lowering things like nutritional standards. The key point here is that cannot easily generalize about MNC effects on the economy and work. Their impact varies enormously depending on the industry, the countries involved, and how they operate. To understand why globalization and foreign trade occur, we need to understand the economic theory behind it. The benefits of foreign trade are based on the theory of comparative advantage, first formulated by British economist David Ricardo in the early 19th century. The basic idea is that firms and countries should focus on what they do best relative to others, even if they could theoretically do everything better than their competitors. It's about opportunity cost. Whenever you spend time or resources doing one thing, you're giving up the opportunity to do something else. So even if the fictional Republic of Fredonia can produce everything better than the Kingdom of Sylvania, Fredonia could still buy certain goods from Sylvania if doing so allows Fredonia to focus its resources on things where it has an even greater advantage. However, the chapter points out the firms have a number of practical reasons for setting up foreign subsidies that go beyond pure comparative advantage. These include avoiding trade barriers, reducing transportation costs, and better understanding local customers, dealing with currency fluctuations, and sometimes just the ambitions of executives who want to run larger, more prestigious companies. Not all of these motivations are based on strict economic logic. This brings us to one of the most contentious aspects of globalization, its effects on employment. Foreign investment creates job opportunities in poor countries, but the benefits are very unevenly distributed. China exemplifies both the benefits and drawbacks of foreign trade and investment. So let me give you updated figures that show how the situation has evolved. China's economic growth has slowed significantly from its earlier breakneck pace. In 2023, China's GDP growth was 5.2%, and projections for 2024 expected growth of 4.8%, far slower than the 10% average it sustained from the 1980s to early 2010s, but still quite robust for a mature economy. Youth unemployment has become a significant challenge, with official rates peaking at 21.3% in mid 2023 before declining to 16.1% by November 24. Though some analysts suggest the true rate may be much higher. This reflects the challenges of transitioning from export driven manufacturing to a more service oriented economy. Meanwhile, China's foreign direct investment inflows fell by 13.7% in 2023 to 163 billion, attributed to post-COVID recovery issues, geopolitical tensions, and regulatory uncertainties. However, the first 9 months of 2024 showed signs of recovery, with China attracting 90.26 billion in foreign investment. In developed countries like the U.S., the picture is more complex. Foreign direct investment in the United States totaled $150 billion in 24, a 14.2% decrease from 23, but employment at newly acquired, established, or expanded foreign-owned businesses was 204,200 employees. The effects remain similar to technology changes. Both create winners and losers, with uneven distribution of benefits. Globalization isn't just about goods and capital, it's also about people. Immigration has been a worldwide phenomenon, and the recent data showed some significant changes in these patterns. As of 2025, more than 53 million immigrants live in the United States, the largest number ever recorded. However, after decades of growth, the U.S. immigrant population is now experiencing its first decline since the 1960s. By June 2025, the foreign-born population shrank by more than a million due to more immigrants leaving or being deported than arriving. Despite this decline, immigrants still make up about 19% of the U.S. labor force as of 2024. Down from 20% earlier. The hope of securing employment remains the major motivating factor for both legal and illegal immigrants. Recent data shows that foreign-born workers have higher labor force participation rates, 77.3% for foreign-born men compared to 65.9% for native-born men. Though foreign-born women participate at slightly lower rates than native-born women. Guest worker programs have been put forward as a means of controlling immigration while meeting labor needs. The U.S. currently operates several programs, including H-1B visas for specialized workers, H-2A for ag workers, H-2B for other seasonal work. In 2024, the H-2B program was capped at 66,000 visas, while H-2A has no limit. However, these programs have faced criticism. Between 22 and 23, top H-1B using companies laid off 85,000 American workers while bringing in over 34,000 guest workers. Looking at the bigger picture, many immigrants have provided needed skills and entrepreneurial energies. Recent data shows 46% of Fortune 500 companies in 2024 were founded by immigrants or their children, the highest level record recorded since tracking began in 2011. These 230 new American companies generated $8.6 trillion in revenue in fiscal year 2024, employed over 15.4 million people worldwide, and if they were a standalone country, would rank as the third largest economy globally. More broadly, immigrants found 19% of all new businesses in 2025, despite making up only 14% of the U.S. population. This entrepreneurial spirit translates into job creation. 91% of new immigrant owned businesses had at least one employee, compared to 84% of all businesses surveyed. Perhaps most importantly, immigrants will take on growing importance as the population of developed countries grow older on average. The U.S. has reached what's called peak 65 in 24, with more than 11,200 Americans turning 65 every day through 2027, over 4.1 million each year. This represents the largest wave of retirements in U.S. history. The demographic challenge is significant. About 53% of these peak boomers have less than $250,000 in total assets, and many will rely heavily on Social Security. As this generation moves into retirement and requires more health and personal care, many of these jobs are low paying and not very appealing to native born workers. The positions are already disproportionately filled by immigrants, and the pattern will likely become even more pronounced as demographic pressures intensify. As we wrap up Chapter 6, I want you to think about how globalization has touched your own life. Look around your room. How many of your possessions were made in other countries? Think about the food you eat, the entertainment you consume, the job prospects you're considering. The key insight from this chapter is that globalization is neither inherently good nor bad. It is a complex process with both benefits and costs that are unevenly distributed. Like technological change, it creates winners and losers, often in dramatic fashion. Globalization has brought us lower priced goods, new job opportunities in some sectors, cultural exchange, and solutions to demographic challenges. But it also eliminated entire industries in some regions, created cultural conflicts, and contributed to growing inequality both within and between countries. Most importantly, remember that globalization isn't an impersonal, unstoppable force. It is driven by human decisions, by governments, corporations, and individuals. This means it has the potential to be shaped and guided according to human needs. As we continue through this course, we'll see how globalization intersects with many other themes: technology, organizational change, labor markets, and income equality. The forces we've discussed today will reappear as we examine more specific aspects of work and employment. Understanding globalization is crucial for anyone entering today's job market. The skills that will be most valuable, the industries that will grow or shrink, the places where opportunities will emerge, all of these are increasingly shaped by global forces. The more you understand these dynamics, the better prepared you will be to navigate your own career in this interconnected world. This concludes Chapter 6. Thank you for paying attention, and I'll see you next time as we continue exploring how these large-scale forces shape individual working lives.